In the last interview I did with Kamala, she mentions going to India and going to jail. However, she left out a lot of very interesting stuff which happened around that time, which she's going to explain here.
My memory of that time is, though, that Baba was actually more available to us when he would leave his house. He was closer. You could look in his eyes more. I actually took some photographs of Baba in one of those early walks, which I had for a long time and then lost, but you weren't supposed to, but I managed to do that. After a few days, Dada Jyoti Rupananda, who actually wasn't a Dada then, but he was also an American Margi that I knew, said that he was going to Ananda Nagar and did I want to come? And I was supposed to be staying at this hostel, but I wanted to go to Ananda Nagar. And so early one morning I arranged to meet Dada, and so I left. I took my luggage out of the hostel and I had to sign something and tell the guard that I was in. So I said I was leaving India, but I actually wasn't. So we left and we went to took the train to Ananda Nagar, and it had started to be the rainy season. So that was also quite a tough and sort of disappointing experience, because Ananda Nagar at that time was pretty bombed out. Like, it had been destroyed a lot during the emergency, and most of the buildings were kind of in ruins. And I didn't know how to bathe in public spaces, and I got a little sick, and Dada got quite sick, and everything was very muddy and very wet, and that's how what used to happen at the rainy season was that everything just turned into complete mud. And so that was, after not a lot of days at Ananda Nagar, I was kind of ready to go home to leave, and I was actually ready to leave India by now, and I wanted to go to the very first Global Prout Conference, which was being held in Rennes, France. And Rennes, France is where, as it happens, I was initiated while I was doing a school year abroad program. So I was very excited to take my ticket that I had already purchased and fly from India to France and attend this first Global Prout Conference. So then we went back to Calcutta, and at that time you needed to confirm your flight at the Air India office in Calcutta before you flew. And I kind of was aware that I had not told, that I needed to be a little bit secret about that. I guess I must have had my passport. I actually don't quite remember how all that worked, but it was a Friday afternoon, and I was going to the Air India office, and one thing that happened was that when I came there, the guy that was working there said, when he saw my passport name or something, he said, it's you. He said, the police have been every day looking for you here. And then he said, I know about your Ananda Marga. He said, I have been a communist, and we were meeting with the Prout people. The Prout people want to make India into like a patchwork quilt of so many different countries. He was referring to the Samaj movement. And we would have worked with them, but they wouldn't work with us. Something like that he was saying. And it was interesting just to meet someone who actually had known Ananda Marga. So I guess I got my ticket confirmed, but it must have been coming out of the Air India office that I was then arrested by the police. And I guess I actually don't remember, but maybe because I had said I was leaving, or because whatever it was, or because I'd gotten to see Baba now, then they took me into the police station, and the first night they put me in a police jail. And I had all my bags with me at that time. Yeah, I had everything with me. And I was, so that first night I was put in like a women's jail. And that was already interesting, because it was a little bit, it was a little bit scary. But there were two young women. They put me in. There was somehow like more common cases, and then there was a slightly nicer cell. And I was with these two young women who were 18 and 19 years old, who were nicely dressed and very friendly. And they didn't speak much English, but we somehow managed to communicate, and maybe with the help of the guard, that they were love marriage case, and that they had been married or had boyfriends against their, in one case the father, in the other case the older brother's will, and they were being sent to prison for this. And they showed me pictures of their boyfriends. But they were quite cheerful, and I learned my first thing about Bengali culture, which was that they asked me, "Tumi nach koro, tumi gan koro," which is, do you know how to dance and do you know how to sing? And that night they showed me their dances and songs, and I tried to teach them the jitterbug, and it was interesting. But by the next day I was ready to go, but they took me again to the police station. And then there was a long process where they were going through all my items, and I guess that would be to keep them safely in storage. They were listing everything that was in my bags and writing it down on a big, piece of paper. And there were a whole bunch of policemen sitting at a table. And so I took out a couple of Baba's books that I had, and I started reading something like Subhasita Sangraha. And the head inspector said, "Oh, can I read one of those books too?" And so I remember handing him Human Society Part 1 and Subhasita Sangraha, and we both sat together at the table and we read. And then when they had finished all of that, they were actually getting ready to take me to the prison. He stood up at his desk with his hands on his desk, and he said, tell me, no matter what, you will not give up your ideology." And I had given him those 2 books and said he could keep them. Who knows what came from that. So then they were taking me to the Calcutta Presidency jail, and along the way then I said that I wanted to speak to a lawyer, and at some point they gave me I remember a 2-page type list of lawyers who spoke English or something who worked in this kind of case in Calcutta, and I remember just saying my Guru Mantra and putting my finger on one. And the lawyer that I ended up getting was someone who had worked, maybe as like an apprentice or when he was first learning, had been part of Baba's case. So he was familiar with Ananda Marga, so he turned out to be a good choice. So that day they took me to the Calcutta Presidency jail, which I remember it had like 6 sections. It was really big. And for women, there was the regular women's section, and then there was the criminally insane, or women who were mentally unwell. I can't remember what it was called. And then there were other sections for men, probably different levels of violence or something. It was a big place. And, it was a little freaky, despite having sort of a certain confidence and naivete from being young. But it was funny because when you come into the prison, then there's long lines of people, and then they're checking in who you are, and they say, your name and your father's name, your name and your father's name. And they'd say that to each person. And so what you heard was, Nam, Baba Nam, Baba Nam. That's how you say that in Bengali. And also for me, Baba Nam Kevalam. So I remember getting there to the prison, the compound, the women's compound, fairly late in the afternoon and a little bit overwhelmed. This compound had about 300 women, and it was a compound, so they were like lock-up areas that were open, most of them open during the day. Women could move around the compound, then they were locked in at night. And they kept me in the small, it was a decent little building, like a big room, that was the hospital, and it had fans and beds, which was more comfortable. And they just kept me there, which was kind, because it was more comfortable. And I remember they sat me down in a chair, and I actually started crying, and the women were really nice and brought me tea and biscuits. And always in India, I had a reversed racist privilege because I looked quite a lot Indian with dark hair, but because I had white skin, I looked, I guess, like a movie star or an upper-class Indian, and people tended to treat me really well. And I remember right from the beginning, women would stroke their own skin, which was beautiful and shiny and dark, and say kala or black. And I just found it so shocking that women didn't find themselves beautiful as they were. But that did help me in jail, just to be well treated. So I ended up spending 2 weeks in the Calcutta Presidency jail, and as I said, I had this desire to learn Bengali and to get to know Indian women, and that's what I got to do there. It was frustrating that not very many women spoke English, and I would try really, really, really hard to listen and try to know more about their lives, but there was only a little bit of people speaking English. There were quite a lot of children in that prison compound. I'm thinking between 40 and 60 it could have been. And much later, I read in the newspaper that orphanages in India were so bad and dirty that the prison was actually one of the better places that orphans were kept. And Indian people did not, at that time, wouldn't adopt, because they wouldn't adopt a child outside their family. So these children, if ever they were to have been adopted, would have been adopted by foreigners. And they were really gorgeous children. And actually, I think some of the women there felt they had 3 meals a day, they had a place to sleep, and for some of them that was better. What I learned was that women were mostly in jail for 3 or 4 reasons. And there was this love marriage case, and there were women in jail for this. I don't know exactly how that happened, but if they had married or got into a relationship without their parents' will, they could end up in jail. A very common thing was passport case. And that was women from Bangladesh who had come to Calcutta without a passport. And this was, after partition, a lot of Indian women were a lot of families were broken up, and so people often tried to cross the border to come back to their families or their properties. And so people were picked up if they didn't have a passport, if they'd come from Bangladesh. And Harigachi case, it seems to me, was something like lost, and those would have been street women, and maybe also some women who had petty thieves. And then there was 6 women in the jail who were murder case. And I ended up talking to 2 of them who spoke some English, I guess, and they had both murdered their husbands. And those 2 women, I remember, were kept mostly in their own sort of cell, but it was still open to the compound. And it feels to me that one of those women had her daughter with her, who was free in the compound. I think I got to know a woman who was working as a nurse who spoke some English, but they took good care of me. I was pretty not knowing what to do, and the prison eventually gave me. I had just had a skirt and a blouse that I brought with me, and they issued me with a prison sari, but no petticoat or top. So I'd have my bath and then wrap up in this red sari that they gave me, and the women would oil my hair. And I spent a lot of time with the children, and they were learning Bengali alphabet on slates. And so that's how I learned also to read some Bengali, was learning with the children on the slates. And then I did some juggling for the children and did origami with them. And I remember wanting to write, just to have some paper and pencil to write. And that was a big request, like something just like paper and pencil there was not easy to come by. Things were really poor. But I did get, I got, the food was pretty okay, because I was given separate food. That it was like mountains and mountains of white rice and a little bit of curry, and very white bread sometimes for dinner with some curry. Anyway, it was okay, and there were moments that were hard, but it was okay, and it was something I guess I'd sort of asked for. At a certain point, then my case came up in trial. I must have gone to see my lawyer once or twice, and he brought some money, gave me some money, some rupees that my father had sent $2,000 over to pay for everything, which I didn't know at the time, and he gave me some money from that. So here's an aside, I was really naive and young and confident, but my father received a telegram from the State Department signed by Alexander Haig that said, and I still have a copy of it somewhere, your daughter is in prison in Calcutta because of her involvement with the communistic and anarchist Ananda Marga. And my father, that he just would have flipped. Would have been really, really hard. And he nearly flew to India. He got his congressperson to help, and basically they sent the money over and worked with the lawyer. I wasn't so aware of that at the time, but after a certain time, maybe after 7 or 10 days, then my court hearing came up, and I was taken to the courthouse, and they just put you in actually they probably there's a holding cell for prisoners, and I just remember sitting in kind of a closet that was full of old files and stuff all day, being very bored, and very it was a little distressing, and I had this money that had been given to me, some 50 rupees or something, and I'm thinking what to do. And there was some attendant there, and I just got this idea to buy sweets for the women in the prison. So I sent someone out, and she brought sweets, and I brought them back to the ladies in the prison. And I don't know if they understood, but it was like, felt so good to just do something really positive that day. I don't think I knew much about the outcome of anything, and no one talked to me too much, so I came back on the paddy wagon and back to the prison, and I had some more days there. And I remember on a particular day, the women had done my hair and oiled in braids, and the children had been given mendipati. That's my recollection of the word, but it's like henna leaves. Someone had given them a branch of leaves that make the henna paste that makes the red dye, red on your skin or on your hair. And they had taken the leaves off, and they had pounded it up, and some of the children had asked to put the mendi on my hand, but not very well, just little blobs of red all over my hand. And just washing it off, and so I had this sort of blobby red things all over my hand. And then they came and said, you're released now. And so I was with the mendi on my hand and hair and braids, and I put on my one set of clothes, and they picked me up and took me to one of the fanciest hotels in Calcutta. It might have been the Calcutta Hilton. Can't remember the name, but it was a very fancy hotel. And so I went straight from the Calcutta Presidency jail to prison to one of the fanciest hotels in Calcutta on the Maidan in the downtown Calcutta on the 6th floor. And I was so disoriented that I ordered some Indian food from room service, and then sat on the floor and ate it with my hands. Late that night, I developed an earache, and I went down to the front desk to see if they could help me with that. And I can't remember what they did. I remember them recommending mustard oil, but I don't remember if we did that. But I ended up talking to the two young guys that were working at the front desk, and they were like, "We're all wondering who you are. You came in here with your hair and braids, and this is one of the fanciest hotels, and you were just wearing, your one backpack and mendi all over your hands, and we're trying to figure out who you are." And so I told them that I was Ananda Marga, and I'd been persecuted for that. And they said, "Did you know that your Baba stayed at this hotel? And sometime previous, I guess before Baba had a place to stay in Calcutta, he had actually come to that hotel, and they remembered him." And those young guys said, one of them said, "I have a guru who would like to meet you, because he's had some experience with Ananda Marga." So then started a new phase of this wild adventure, which was I ended up having 2 weeks in Calcutta, and during that time many amazing things happened. I was actually on bail. So what happened was that the court case was probably bribes passed hands, I would guess, but they ended up giving me a 2-week jail sentence because I had violated the Foreigners Act of 1951, which allowed the Indian government to prohibit foreigners from going to different parts of India, and they had made Baba's house a prohibited place for foreigners, and I had broken that law, and therefore I had to have imprisonment. But they made it a 2-week imprisonment, and then I was let out on bail for those 2 weeks, and that's how that ran through. So I had 2 weeks that I needed to stay in Calcutta, and I was told, probably in no uncertain terms, that I was to not visit Baba or any Ananda Marga Center during that time. But during those 2 weeks, a lot of really interesting things happened, and one of them was that I went. It probably wasn't that first day, but it was this young hotel clerk took me across the Maidan, which is a big park in Calcutta, in the middle of Calcutta, to the office of his guru, who was also a local doctor. And he was the kind of guru that he was a well-respected guy in Calcutta, and he had been before running the Boy Scouts, and he also was the kind of guru that he had many gurus, so he had lots of pictures of different gurus on his walls. But he said, it feels like he pulled out a picture of Baba from his bookshelf. And then he also he showed me a garland that was hanging on the wall on a hook or something. He said, "We are waiting to see if your Baba is the reincarnation of Krishna or not." And it just turned out that when he had been the head of the Boy Scouts, some years previous, it would have been a fair number of years previous, Baba used to take his field walk in the Maidan there, and he would be there also. And Baba had brought him a garland and invited him to join Ananda Marga. And he would have declined, I guess, because he had another path, or I don't remember that. But Baba, that's when I first saw that Baba had actually done prachar as well. Well, the Calcutta Presidency Jail was right across the street from the Aurobindo Bhavan. So Sri Aurobindo is a spiritual teacher who had been a communist, and interestingly, he had been sent to jail, to the Calcutta Presidency Jail, and did meditation there, and then decided instead, anyway, had a deep spiritual realization, became enlightened, and became a spiritual teacher. And they had a bhavan, which is like an office in Calcutta, which had a beautiful meditation garden, and it was quite near the hotel. And it feels to me that actually there was this first day when I went out, even the first day I arrived, I went over there, and they were about to organize a tour to the Calcutta Presidency Jail to see the place where Aurobindo had his enlightenment. And I was like, oh, that would be really interesting to go back. And somehow I just missed the tour bus. I was always just so disappointed, because it would have been really interesting to see the jail from another perspective. But a few things happened, though. I guess I was going regularly to that garden to do meditation. So in the right at the beginning, it feels like it was the very first day that I was there. I was doing meditation in the garden, maybe in the evening, and a man was there. And I guess people are always interested, why is this American woman meditating in the garden here? And struck up a conversation. I explained my story with Ananda Marga, and he said, well, that's amazing that I would meet you here. He said, I actually am here because you could see that he was doing some kind of ceremony there. He said, I've just completed a book that's just been published, and I've got the first copies, and I'm dedicating them to God here with this ceremony. And the book that I've just written is called Letters from a Husband to a Wife. And I have a copy of that still somewhere. And he said, because he gave me a copy, but he said, when I was traveling around India for work, then I wrote letters back to my wife about all kinds of philosophical ideas that I encountered and spiritual teachers that I met. And the very last chapters of my book, I encountered Ananda Marga. And I think he had just read an Ananda Marga book or met one monk or Dada or Didi or something. I can't remember what his exposure was. It was limited. But he had thought a lot about it, and he had written several of these letters to his wife about the Ananda Marga philosophy. But because it was after the emergency, it was hard to find Ananda Marga. Ananda Marga had been quite in hiding, and he was like, I want to know more, but I don't know how to get in touch with Ananda Marga. I would like to read some more books. So I think his name was Mr. Ghosh. I ended up not following the orders of my bail, and I did end up going most evenings to the Ananda Marga office and seeing Baba. And so I ended up bringing this man like a little stack of books, Ananda Marga books, and he was so, so grateful. Well, another thing that happened to the Aurobindo ashram was a similar story. There were several old men that ran the ashram, and they saw me meditating there, and they were curious, and again I told them the story that I was a Margi, and they invited me in for tea. And one of these men, his name's just left my mind, but I visited him for years and years afterwards when I used to come to Calcutta. So he had a story that he had worked in the same railway office as Baba. And what he used to say, every time I'd see him, was like, your Baba can raise the Kunda Kundalini with a single touch of his hand. That's the phrase I remember. His name was Himangshu Da. Yeah. And so it turned out that he had known Baba, and he said that Baba came to his place and said, now I am Ananda Murti, and invited him to join Ananda Marga. And he would say that, with a little bit of, he said, I already had a guru, because he was a follower of Aurobindo, so I could not follow your Baba. And then he would but your Baba can raise the Kundalini with a single touch of his hand. And I'm guessing that was his experience. I don't remember. Anyway, I stayed friends with Himanshu Da, and again I learned that Baba himself had done prachar. After the very first night or second night, I moved out of the Calcutta Hilton and I moved into the YMCA hostel, or YWCA, I don't remember, hostel that was just like across the street. And just the other thing that happened there was that I met a man there who was researching child kidnapping, something really quite heavy. It seemed like it was for a British newspaper or something in India. And he recognized me because he had seen me. He had also had some time in jail, and he had seen me when I was in the court, or maybe he was reporting, I don't know, but he'd seen me in the courthouse. And he also, so when he saw me at the YWCA, he came up to me and said, I saw you in court, what happened to you? And I ended up telling him my story, and he was there doing some big reporting, but he also had heard about Ananda Marga but couldn't figure out how to contact Ananda Marga. And he was another person who I gave a lot of Ananda Marga books to and was extremely grateful. So, during that time, I would go over at night and get to see Baba going on field walk, and that was really nice also. But eventually those 2 weeks ended, and I was actually, they gave me back my passport, and I was just seeing that in some notes that I kept, I really then wasn't supposed to go back to see Baba's house, but I went one more time to see Baba, and then the next day, flew home. By that time, it was very disappointing for me because I missed the Global Prout Conference in France, and was just able to fly home not too long before university started again, or college, as you say in America. And it was quite something to have left that huge experience in India and then start again my college experience. And just the final thing I want to say is, I had borrowed money to go, and thinking, this is too hard, I'll never have enough money, I'll never be able to go. But I, with Mohan's help, I started a little sprouting business called Prout Sprouts in the house I was living, growing sprouts, and was very quickly able to pay back the money for that loan.
Thank you, Kamala.